What's going on, guys? It's Zach here. Bring you guys another fantasy football video. Like I said in the previous video, we just finished up the NFL draft, and it's sort of time to sort of just evaluate what happened there and really get our bearings and get an understanding of what impacted what we should expect happening in 2024, along with going forward for those of you who play Dynasty. So in this video, I'll be going over all of the running backs that were drafted this season, telling you where they landed, what I'm expecting for them going forward, and what I think their fantasy impact is going to be. If you haven't watched the previous video, I went over all of the quarterbacks that were drafted, so if you're interested in that, go watch the previous video, and then tomorrow you guys will be getting the video on the wide receivers and the tight ends as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're really kicking it into high gear here. We're going to have a lot more videos coming out in the future because we've got about as much information as we're going to get, so it'll be time to really start statting things out. You guys can expect to see my rankings and everything up on the website here in the next couple of weeks, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of fun here going forward. So really appreciate all you guys and hope you guys enjoy it. So yeah, with that, let's get into the first running back. Starting things off with Jonathan Brooks, he was the first running back drafted in the 2024 draft. He was taken in round 2 at pick 46 by the Carolina Panthers. Bit of a strange pick by the Panthers, given that I feel like they have a lot more needs, but they clearly do like Jonathan Brooks if they're willing to take him that high, given that they are a team that do have quite a few needs. I think as far as the outlook for him goes, I think Miles Sanders might as well retire at this point. I know he got a pretty big deal last season, but he basically played his way into a backup role behind Chuba Hubbard, and now this draft pick of Jonathan Brooks probably puts Miles Sanders back down to third on the depth chart. I would expect to see mostly a split between Brooks and Chuba over the first half of the season. I will note that Jonathan Brooks is coming off of a torn ACL, so I wouldn't expect him to really be at full strength early on in the season. We'll probably see Chuba get more of the work early on in the season, and then as the season progresses on, Brooks should take over. But you don't take a running back this high, especially if you're the Panthers, and not use him. They've got Dave Canales as the head coach down in Carolina. He's got roots from back in Seattle, along with Tampa Bay. We know they like to use their running backs quite a bit in this offensive system. So there's an opportunity here for him to be relevant. I just think it's going to be a bit of a timeshare and a bad offense. So he's probably like a low-end running back 2 at best in 2024. But I do like him. I think he's a talented player. And when he gets healed, I think in 2025 and going forward, especially if this offense in Carolina can turn around, you could see some good things for Brooks. Next, we've got Trey Benson. He's my personal favorite running back in the draft. If I was an NFL GM, he'd have been the first running back off the board in my eyes. He was drafted in round 2 by the Arizona Cardinals. Not a great landing spot for him, at least in year 1, because he will probably be operating behind James Conner. James Conner just looked really good again last season. He keeps sort of beating the odds and being a high-quality player. He is, however, going to be 29 this season. This is likely the last dance, basically, for James Conner. So at least 2 years from now, I would expect quite a much larger workload for Trey Benson. But even in this year, should see plenty of snaps. On top of that, we know James Conner's prone to missing games, so there will be a point in time where Trey Benson should be, the focal point of the offense out of the backfield, at least for a couple weeks of the season. Obviously, this is going to be an offense that we expect to be a lot better this season. The Cardinals picked up Marvin Harrison Jr. in the draft. Obviously, Kyler Murray should have a full offseason now, having been recovering from the ACL last season. Trey McBride could take a step forward. So this is going to be a good offense, and Trey Benson should be just like a high-end handcuff. Maybe a guy that you could play in a pinch. We'll see what the snap share ends up being, but I would probably expect him to see, roughly 30% of the workload if everybody's healthy, and then he'll get a lot more if anything ever happens to Connor. Next, we've got Blake Corum. He was drafted in the 3rd round by the Los Angeles Rams. He's likely going to operate as the number 2 back in LA behind Kyren Williams, but he is a talented player. He led college football in rushing touchdowns last season. I believe he had 27. He's a good player. He's a guy that can do everything. Nothing jumps out about Blake Corum in terms of his athleticism or any of that, but he's just a productive player. The numbers speak for themselves. I know he doesn't jump off the tape or anything, but he's a good player. I would, however, expect something more of like a 70% Kyren, 30% Blake Corum split in LA. I know a lot of people are super concerned about what this means for Kyren going forward, at least in terms of his viability as a running back 1 in fantasy. I think it makes him like a lower end running back 1 still. Probably a guy that should be taken at like the middle of round 2, maybe late round 1, the earliest. We'll see what we get in terms of reports out of training camp and all of that. But they were giving Kyren Williams over 90% of the snaps last season at certain points. We know Kyren Williams is a guy who's missed time so far over the course of his career. It's just not something that was going to be sustainable. They needed to get another running back in this offense, and it does suck a little bit if you're a Kyren fan that it was a player taken this high, but I still think it's Kyren Williams' job. The only real concern for Kyren would be that I do think there's a chance, at least, that Blake Corum steals goal line work. He's shown that he can be a really high-end touchdown producer in college, but Kyren Williams did a great job at that as well last season. So I think it's probably pretty safe here. Blake Corum, again, just a high-end handcuff on a good offense. Like I said, Kyren Williams has missed time in the past, so he's a guy that should be probably drafted in like the later rounds in fantasy drafts this season. Next, we're going to move on to Marshon Lloyd. We're sort of past the three running backs that I think have like a legitimate shot to be realistic fantasy contributors this season. But Marshon Lloyd, he was drafted in the fourth round by the Green Bay Packers, just highly unlikely to be a contributor this season. He's behind Josh Jacobs and AJ Dillon on the depth chart. But I will note that Josh Jacobs signed a 4-year deal this offseason, but there's no guaranteed money in year two. There's a chance that if Josh Jacobs plays poorly, he could be off the team next season. AJ Dillon, his contract does expire after this season, so there's at least a path forward for Marshon Lloyd to potentially be the running back one in Green Bay next year. So he's an explosive player. He's an interesting name to keep an eye on in Dynasty, but I don't really expect a lot out of him this year in 2024. Next, we've got Jaylen Wright, who was drafted by the Miami Dolphins in the fourth round. He's clearly going to operate as a third running back in this offense behind Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane, but it is a really great fit. He was the fastest running back at the Combine this year, and we know that the Dolphins love their speed guys. And there's likely going to be some games, at least in 2024, that Mostert or Achane will miss. Both Mostert and Achane have proven to be injury prone over the course of their careers. Achane, obviously, really early in his career, a little too early to call him injury prone, but he missed a lot of time last year. He's a small guy. We could certainly see him miss more games in the future. So I think there will be games, at least, where Jaylen Wright does see the field. Think about like Jeff Wilson or Salvon Ahmed last year. I think you could potentially see a situation where Jaylen Wright returns kickoffs for them as well. And on top of that, if Mostert is moved on from after the season, I know he technically got an extension just a couple months ago. But there's the possibility that Jaylen Wright could be like the running back two in this backfield come 2025. So he's an interesting name. He's an explosive player, but I don't expect a lot out of him, at least in 2024. Next, we've got Bucky Irving, drafted out of Oregon in the fourth round by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's more of a pass catching specialist than anything else. He did have over 1,000 rushing yards each of the last two seasons in college, but he really profiles to be more of a pass catching specialist, and that's already what Rachaad White does best. So I don't really see this being a situation where he's a threat to Rachaad White in terms of actually taking meaningful snaps away from him. I think it's just going to be like a 1A or a 1B situation, probably like that 70-30 split. So you do probably lose a little bit of the workhorse role that Rachaad White had last season, but I don't really want to expect too much to come out of Bucky Irving being in Tampa. It's still Rachaad White's job, and Bucky Irving's just going to be there to spell him some. Next, I'm sort of just going to rapid fire through all of the other running backs that were drafted. None of these guys really stand out as being super relevant to me, so I didn't want to spend too much time on them. If you're in Dynasty, obviously these guys are more important to you, but if you're in redraft, I think it's highly unlikely that these guys end up being relevant. I'll start with Ray Davis. He was drafted by the Bills in the fourth round. He has more of a bigger body. There's a chance that Ray Davis ends up being that goal line back for Buffalo, so there's at least a path towards him being somewhat fantasy relevant this year. Isaac Guerendo was drafted by the 49ers in the fourth round. Again, pure handcuff. They've obviously got a lot of other guys there. I'd be shocked if he ends up being relevant. The Jets took Braylon Allen in the fourth round, along with Isaiah Davis in the fifth round. They've got Breece Hall. I don't know what they're doing, thinking they need to take two running backs in the draft, but they did. Neither one's going to be fantasy relevant this year at all. The Broncos took Audric Estime in the fifth round. Sort of just a bit of a handcuff situation, I guess. Obviously, Javonte Williams still going to be the lead back. We saw Jaleel McLaughlin and Samaje Perine put together some decent performances last season. There's obviously a lot of unknown in terms of what this Broncos offense is going to shake out as. I don't think the Broncos are necessarily sold on Javonte Williams going forward. Jaleel McLaughlin's a small player. Samaje Perine's getting up there in age. So we'll see what happens there. There's plenty of opportunity for somebody to potentially emerge, but I wouldn't necessarily bet on Estime being super fantasy relevant. The Giants took Tyrone Tracy in the fifth round. This is an interesting name for me. He's a converted wide receiver into a running back. He's going to be a really great pass catching specialist for them. We know that they don't really have a true running back one in New York. They gave Devin Singletary a pretty significant contract here, but Singletary's never proven to be really a guy that can maintain and hold like a true workhorse or RB1 role on a roster. Tracy's the guy that, especially if there were games where Singletary missed, I would expect, really high usage, at least as a pass catcher. We could see him being a third down specialist. So he's a guy that I would keep an eye on. Could be like a PPR darling, like dart throw late in drafts if you want to. The Jaguars took Keelan Robinson in round 5. Probably just more depth for them. They obviously have Dearness Johnson. They've got Tank Bigsby along with the obvious Travis Etienne. So not a real path forward for him being potentially relevant, but it's someone to at least keep an eye on. The Jaguars do clearly want to get somebody the ball more outside of Travis Etienne just so they're not working Travis Etienne too hard over the course of the season. The Chargers took Kimani Vidal in the sixth round. Interesting name to keep an eye on given the depth chart in Los Angeles right now. They've got Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins and really nothing else. J.K. Dobbins will be recovering from that torn Achilles. So there's the possibility that we see Vidal get some work early on in the season. Gus Edwards isn't exactly an image of health either. He's obviously missed a lot of time over the course of his career, so he's someone we could see being potentially relevant, but I'd just be shocked if it really happens without an injury. Jason McClellan was drafted in the 6th round by the Atlanta Falcons. Good running back out of Alabama. Not really a path forward for him being fantasy relevant, just being behind Bijan and Algier, so I'll ignore him. Jawar Jordan, drafted in the 6th round by the Houston Texans, obviously going to be behind Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce played really poorly last season. He could potentially take the number 2 role there, I guess, but you're going to need an injury for him to be relevant. And then Dylan Laub was drafted in the 6th round by the Las Vegas Raiders. I'd be shocked if he's super relevant. We've got Alexander Mattison and Zamir White in Las Vegas. I think, honestly, Zamir White's probably going to be their guy here. I think Zamir White probably needs to get moved up in draft boards because they really just didn't address the position. He's a good player. Madison's not a threat. I think Zamir White could very realistically be a running back 2 for us this next season. So that'll do it for the video today. Up next, I'll be going over the pass-catching players that were drafted. So I'll go over all of the wide receivers and the tight ends that I believe are going to be fantasy relevant. There's going to be a lot more players on that list, so I probably won't touch on all of them in that video. So I will just touch on the guys that I think have a chance to be fantasy relevant. And then if there's any player that I don't mention, feel free to bring him up in the comments. I'll be happy to give you guys my opinion on him as well. But it's going to be super exciting. We've got the NFL draft out of the way. It's going to be a fun offseason. We're going to start getting hype pieces on all these rookies. It's going to be fun to see our rankings move when we get all these beat reporter reports and all that. It's just going to be a really fun offseason, and I'm getting excited for football already, and it's only April. So I really appreciate all you guys. I do have a goal of hitting 1,000 subscribers before the start of the NFL season. We're at like 970 right now, so if we just get 30 more over the next couple months, that would be awesome. I know we can do it, but just help me out if you haven't already. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of the future videos, just give me a subscription. That way you don't miss any future videos. And if you're already subscribed, you can help me out by liking the video. So thank you guys so much, and I'll catch you next time. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.